The bar on Station Astra was always too loud, too crowded, too alive. Ships from 100 worlds came and went here, smugglers, explorers, soldiers, ambassadors, all different species, shapes, and faces. And yet, even among this strange crowd, Commander Ryan Hale felt out of place. He sat alone at a corner table, swirling the last inch of a drink he couldn't pronounce, watching as alien lights flashed against the glass walls. Somewhere beyond them, Earth was a blue dot, small, distant, and almost forgotten. "Commander Hale," said a voice behind him, smooth as silk and just a little too close. "You're brooding again." Ryan turned, already smiling because he knew that voice. He would have known it anywhere. "Brooding? I don't brood," he said, looking up at Kaylani, or Kale as he'd learned to call her. She was a Zyrathi, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlight on water and silver hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, deep violet and always too serious, glowed faintly under the bar's neon lights. "Yes, you do," she teased, sliding into the seat across from him. "It's your favorite human pastime, that and making terrible jokes." "I do not make terrible jokes." "You once told a Zaltoran captain that his ship looked compensatory." "It did," Ryan protested, "and he laughed." "He tried to stab you." "See, he laughed first." Kale shook her head, and Ryan felt that familiar warmth in his chest, the one that always showed up when she smiled, even when it was hidden behind an eye roll. They had been working together for 6 months now, a Terran envoy and a Zyrathi diplomat sent to broker peace between two former enemy factions. 6 months of missions, close calls, negotiations, and banter. Always the banter. "Anyway," she said, folding her hands on the table, "I heard you're leaving soon." He sighed. "Yeah, Command wants me back on Earth for debrief. Might be reassigned." "Might." "They haven't decided yet," Ryan admitted. "Could be another mission, could be retirement, could be paperwork duty in a basement. Your guess is as good as mine." Kale's expression softened. "I will miss our arguments." "Arguments," he said with a grin. "I prefer to call them spirited debates." "They're arguments." "Semantics." "Still arguments." They both laughed quietly, easily, and for a while they just sat there, watching the crowd swirl around them. Maybe it was the drink, or the station lights, or the fact that they'd nearly died together 3 times already, but something loosened in Ryan's chest. And that was when he said it. "You know," he said lightly, "if you weren't an alien princess or whatever, I'd marry you." Kale blinked once, twice. "When?" she asked calmly. Ryan froze. "What?" "You said you'd marry me," she said, her tone serious, almost curious. "When?" Ryan stammered, heat rising to his face. "It was a joke." "Was it?" she asked, tilting her head. "Because where I come from, a promise of union, even said in jest, is binding if spoken with sincerity." "I wasn't being sincere," Ryan protested. "I mean, well, I like you, obviously. Anyone with eyes likes you, but marriage, that's a fast." "Humans are strange," she murmured, sipping from his drink like it was hers. "You say such things lightly." "Because they're jokes," he said, still trying to calm his racing heart. "It's a human thing, joking, teasing, banter." Kale studied him for a long, quiet moment. "And yet, you are blushing." "I'm not blushing." "You are." "Am not." "You very much are." They walked back to the docking bay together later that night. The corridors were quiet now, most of the station asleep. The hum of distant engines filled the silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It never was. "I know you were joking," Kale said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "But I also know you meant it just a little." Ryan glanced at her. "You think so?" "I know so." "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just enjoy seeing you flustered." "I am not flustered." "You're very flustered." "I am a Zyrathi diplomat. We do not fluster." He laughed. There it is, the royal tone. She bumped her shoulder against his. "You make me say ridiculous things." "That's my job." "No, your job is to prevent interstellar war." "Yeah," he said with a grin, "that too." When they reached the docking bay, Kale stopped walking. The doors to Ryan's ship hissed open, but neither of them moved. "This may be the last time we see each other," she said softly. "Don't say that." "It's true," she insisted. "I do not know if our governments will allow future cooperation, and I do not know if they would approve of our friendship." "Then we'll make them approve." "Spoken like a human," she said with a faint smile. "Thank you." It was not a compliment. "I'll take it anyway." Silence again, heavier now. The kind that sits on your chest and makes you wish time would slow down. "I meant what I said," Kale whispered finally. "About your words, if they had been sincere, I would have said yes." Ryan's breath caught. "Kale." "Goodbye, Commander Hale," she said, stepping back. "It has been an honor." And then she was gone, down the corridor, into the shadows, leaving Ryan standing there with 100 unsaid words caught in his throat. Hours later, when the ship finally left orbit, Ryan stared out the viewport at the shrinking station. He thought of Kale's laugh, her stubbornness, the way she said when, without hesitation, it was absurd, impossible. They were from different worlds, different species, different lives. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about her. "Commander," the ship's AI said, "course plotted for Earth." "Yeah," he murmured, "take us home." But even as the stars stretched into streaks and the blue of hyperspace swallowed them whole, Ryan knew his heart wasn't going home. It was still there, in that bar, in that corridor, with a violet-eyed woman who took his joke too seriously. Or maybe not seriously enough. Sure, here's part II, about 1,000 words of the story, picking up where the light-hearted moments and misunderstandings lead to deeper connections and adventures. Ryan didn't know how long he had been staring at the stars. Time seemed to drag as the ship coasted through hyperspace, the hum of the engines and the occasional flicker of lights in the control room the only sounds. His hands rested on the console, eyes unfocused, lost in thoughts of Kelani. She had left so suddenly, without warning. He had never expected their goodbye to feel so heavy. But there it was, the promise that had hung between them, casual as a joke, and yet something deeper lingered beneath the laughter and the teasing. "When?" Her words echoed in his mind, and the more he thought about them, the more he realized that he wasn't just laughing at her answer. He was stuck on it. That simple question, spoken so innocently, had shattered the playful barrier between them. And now, as he floated back to Earth, he couldn't escape it. For once, the mission didn't matter. The politics, the treaties, the peace talks, none of that weighed on him now. Only the thought of Kale. He had made a joke, yes, but there was truth in it too. And what if? What if it wasn't too late to do something about it? 3 weeks later, back on Earth, Ryan was doing what he did best, dodging questions from his superiors. The debriefings were predictable. The reports were tedious. And every time his mind wandered, it went straight to Kale and the possibility of what could have been. His communicator buzzed on his desk. "Commander Hale," the voice on the other end was sharp and formal. "You're needed in the briefing room." Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I'll be right there." As he walked through the corridors of the Earth Embassy, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Sergeant Ellis, one of his old comrades. "Hey, Ryan," Ellis jogged up beside him. "I heard you were back from Astra Station. How was the mission?" "Good, successful. Nothing we couldn't handle," Ryan said, trying to sound casual. "Did you finally get a chance to have that drink with your alien princess?" Ellis raised an eyebrow, giving him a sly grin. Ryan paused, the question hanging in the air for a moment longer than necessary. He thought of Kale, her laughter, her strange seriousness, the way she looked at him when he made his ridiculous joke. "I'll tell you about it later," he said, turning away. But Ellis wasn't done. So, what's next for you? Going back to the front lines. I hear Command's got a few assignments lined up. Ryan forced a smile. We'll see. The briefing room was full of officers, diplomats, and analysts, each sitting in silence as the meeting began. But Ryan's mind wasn't on the mission details. He wasn't focused on the incoming threats or the galactic politics. His thoughts kept drifting back to Kale, back to Astra Station, back to the moment that felt like it was still happening, like the weight of their last conversation hung between them. As the debrief wrapped up, Ryan's superior, General Lawson, turned to him. "Hale," the general called, "you're a good negotiator. The higher-ups are impressed with your work. We've got a new assignment for you." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "A new assignment, more peace talks." "Something like that," Lawson said. "But this one's more critical. You're going back to Astra Station. There's another peace treaty being proposed, and we need someone who's built some rapport with the Xyrathi. They're sending you as lead negotiator." Ryan felt a strange thrill. He hadn't been expecting it, but his mind was already racing. "Understood, sir," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the sudden surge of excitement. Days later, Ryan found himself back on Astra Station. The familiar buzz of activity, the clinking of glasses in the nearby bars, and the endless stream of alien voices filled the air. But this time, it wasn't about peace treaties or negotiations. It was about Kale. The mission had been assigned. The talks had already begun. But the first thing Ryan did when he stepped foot on the station was go straight to the bar. There she was. Kale sat at the same table where they had laughed and argued all those weeks ago. Her silver hair shone in the dim light, and her violet eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for something. But when her gaze landed on him, everything else seemed to blur away. She froze. "Ryan," she said, her voice just a whisper. She stood slowly, almost unsure, as though she were afraid he might vanish. Ryan took a step forward, his pulse quickening. "Kale, She didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped toward him, closing the space between them in two swift strides. "When?" she asked, her voice trembling but not in fear, in hope. Ryan felt a grin tug at his lips. "You remembered." "I never forgot," she said, her expression softening. You said you would marry me, and I thought you meant it." "Kale," Ryan started, unsure of where to go with this. "It was a joke. No," she shook her head, her eyes bright with sincerity. "It wasn't a joke, not to me, not when you said it, you promised." Ryan took her hands in his, feeling the weight of her words. "You promised." The words echoed in his head, and he knew in that moment that it was no longer just a joke. It had never been just a joke to Kale. She had taken him seriously. And maybe it was time for him to do the same. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he said quietly. "But Kale, you're right, I did mean it, and I still do." Her eyes searched his face, her breath held tight in her chest. "Then when?" Ryan smiled, his heart pounding with something he couldn't quite explain. "When?" he repeated, his voice soft and teasing, just like their first conversation. "You think I'd marry you, but not without a little adventure first." "You are a human, aren't you?" she said, her lips curving into a smile. "Only when it counts," he said with a grin. Kale's expression softened. "Then let's make sure we get that adventure." The space between them grew smaller with every breath. And this time, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a tease. It was a promise, something neither of them had expected, but both knew they were ready for. And somewhere, deep in the corners of the station, something stirred. There were still political games to be played, and dangerous threats lurking in the shadows. But as Ryan stood there, looking into Kale's violet eyes, he realized that this was the beginning of a whole new kind of adventure. One they would face together. Ryan didn't know how long he had been staring at the stars. Time seemed to drag as the ship coasted through hyperspace, the hum of the engines and the occasional flicker of lights in the control room the only sounds. His hands rested on the console, eyes unfocused, lost in thoughts of Kelani. She had left so suddenly, without warning. He had never expected their goodbye to feel so heavy. But there it was, the promise that had hung between them, casual as a joke, and yet something deeper lingered beneath the laughter and the teasing. When? Her words echoed in his mind, and the more he thought about them, the more he realized that he wasn't just laughing at her answer. He was stuck on it. That simple question, spoken so innocently, had shattered the playful barrier between them. And now, as he floated back to Earth, he couldn't escape it. For once, the mission didn't matter. The politics, the treaties, the peace talks, none of that weighed on him now. Only the thought of Kale. He had made a joke, yes, but there was truth in it too. And what if? What if it wasn't too late to do something about it? 3 weeks later, back on Earth, Ryan was doing what he did best, dodging questions from his superiors. The debriefings were predictable. The reports were tedious. And every time his mind wandered, it went straight to Kale and the possibility of what could have been. His communicator buzzed on his desk. "Commander Hale," the voice on the other end was sharp and formal. "You're needed in the briefing room." Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I'll be right there." As he walked through the corridors of the Earth Embassy, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Sergeant Ellis, one of his old comrades. "Hey, Ryan," Ellis jogged up beside him. "I heard you were back from Astra Station. How was the mission?" "Good, successful. Nothing we couldn't handle," Ryan said, trying to sound casual. "Did you finally get a chance to have that drink with your alien princess?" Ellis raised an eyebrow, giving him a sly grin. Ryan paused, the question hanging in the air for a moment longer than necessary. He thought of Kale, her laughter, her strange seriousness, the way she looked at him when he made his ridiculous joke. "I'll tell you about it later," he said, turning away. But Ellis wasn't done. "So, what's next for you? Going back to the front lines? I hear Command's got a few assignments lined up." Ryan forced a smile. "We'll see." The briefing room was full of officers, diplomats, and analysts, each sitting in silence as the meeting began. But Ryan's mind wasn't on the mission details. He wasn't focused on the incoming threats or the galactic politics. His thoughts kept drifting back to Kale, back to Astra Station, back to the moment that felt like it was still happening, like the weight of their last conversation hung between them. As the debrief wrapped up, Ryan's superior, General Lawson, turned to him. "Hale," the general called, "you're a good negotiator. The higher-ups are impressed with your work. We've got a new assignment for you." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "A new assignment, more peace talks." "Something like that," Lawson said. "But this one's more critical. You're going back to Astra Station. There's another peace treaty being proposed, and we need someone who's built some rapport with the Xyrathi. They're sending you as lead negotiator." Ryan felt a strange thrill. He hadn't been expecting it, but his mind was already racing. "Understood, sir," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the sudden surge of excitement. Days later, Ryan found himself back on Astra Station. The familiar buzz of activity, the clinking of glasses in the nearby bars, and the endless stream of alien voices filled the air. But this time, it wasn't about peace treaties or negotiations. It was about Kale. The mission had been assigned. The talks had already begun. But the first thing Ryan did when he stepped foot on the station was go straight to the bar. There she was. Kale sat at the same table where they had laughed and argued all those weeks ago. Her silver hair shone in the dim light, and her violet eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for something. But when her gaze landed on him, everything else seemed to blur away. She froze. "Ryan," she said, her voice just a whisper. She stood slowly, almost unsure, as though she were afraid he might vanish. Ryan took a step forward, his pulse quickening. "Kale." She didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped toward him, closing the space between them in 2 swift strides. "When?" she asked, her voice trembling but not in fear, in hope. Ryan felt a grin tug at his lips. "You remembered." "I never forgot," she said, her expression softening. You said you would marry me, and I thought you meant it." "Kale," Ryan started, unsure of where to go with this. "It was a joke. No," she shook her head, her eyes bright with sincerity. "It wasn't a joke, not to me, not when you said it, you promised." Ryan took her hands in his, feeling the weight of her words. "You promised." The words echoed in his head, and he knew in that moment that it was no longer just a joke. It had never been just a joke to Kale. She had taken him seriously. And maybe it was time for him to do the same. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he said quietly. "But Kale, you're right, I did mean it, and I still do." Her eyes searched his face, her breath held tight in her chest. "Then when?" Ryan smiled, his heart pounding with something he couldn't quite explain. "When?" he repeated, his voice soft and teasing, just like their first conversation. "You think I'd marry you, but not without a little adventure first." "You are a human, aren't you?" she said, her lips curving into a smile. "Only when it counts," he said with a grin. Kale's expression softened. "Then let's make sure we get that adventure." The space between them grew smaller with every breath. And this time, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a tease. It was a promise, something neither of them had expected but both knew they were ready for. And somewhere, deep in the corners of the station, something stirred. There were still political games to be played, and dangerous threats lurking in the shadows. But as Ryan stood there, looking into Kale's violet eyes, he realized that this was the beginning of a whole new kind of adventure. One they would face together. The next few days on Astra Station felt like a blur of diplomatic meetings, alien negotiations, and fleeting moments between Ryan and Kale. The treaty they had come to negotiate was delicate, more fragile than either of them had anticipated, with factions on both sides eager to sabotage any progress. Yet through it all, Ryan couldn't help but feel that the most important battle wasn't the one in the conference room, it was the one in his heart. Every time Kale looked at him, the promise they had made, even in jest, gnawed at him, reminding him that something had changed. And as much as he tried to deny it, he couldn't ignore it any longer. But the galaxy, it seemed, had other plans. The morning after their quiet conversation, Ryan and Kale stood in the middle of the crowded spaceport, where the tension between the Xyrathi and human representatives was thick. Diplomats, soldiers, and guards passed by in a sea of voices, but it was the looks exchanged between the two species that made the atmosphere feel like it might erupt at any moment. "We need to focus," Kale said, her voice calm but edged with the strain of the day's pressure. "We can't let them see any weakness." "I know," Ryan replied, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "But there's a limit to how much I can smile at these guys before I start to look suspicious." She smiled slightly, her violet eyes softening. "You are a master at looking suspicious." "Why, thank you," he said with a grin. "I've worked hard at it." Her eyes flickered with something deeper. "Ryan, about what happened?" he asked, cutting her off. "I don't know what to say, you." Before Kale could respond, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, followed by alarms blaring. The walls trembled and the overhead lights flickered. A moment later, an announcement crackled over the station's intercom. "Alert! Intruder breach on Sector 7. All personnel are to report to your assigned posts." Ryan's instincts kicked in immediately. This doesn't sound good. Kale's expression hardened. "I'll handle the diplomatic side, you handle the intruders." They exchanged a quick glance before splitting off into the chaos. The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline. Ryan rushed through the station's corridors, blaster at the ready, his mind on one thing: protecting Kale. He had known since they first met that she was no stranger to danger, but seeing her navigate the chaos with a calm efficiency made his heart race. It wasn't just her skill that amazed him. It was the way she commanded the room and him, without ever seeming to break a sweat. As Ryan rounded the corner to Sector 7, he came face to face with a group of heavily armed mercenaries. none of whom looked like they belonged to either the Xyrathi or Terran military. "Stay down," he shouted, firing a few warning shots. "Who are you?" One of the mercenaries, a heavily armored human, sneered. "We're just here to clean up a little mess. You're in the wrong place, Commander." "I don't think I am," Ryan said, his voice cold. "Now get out of the way or we'll make you." The mercenaries didn't back down. One raised a weapon, aiming directly at Ryan. He barely had time to react before a shot rang out from behind him, hitting the mercenary square in the shoulder. Ryan spun around to see Kale standing in the doorway, blaster in hand, her posture perfect. "I told you to stay back," Ryan grunted, dodging another blast. "I didn't listen," Kale said simply, firing another shot. The mercenary went down. Ryan couldn't help but chuckle despite the chaos. "You're trouble, you know that." "Always," she said with a wink. "Let's finish this." The mercenaries were quickly subdued, but the atmosphere didn't lighten. Kale and Ryan stood together, their backs against the wall, surveying the damage. "We're going to have to move fast," Kale said, breathing heavily. "These mercenaries aren't just here by chance." "I know," Ryan replied, glancing at her. "But we can't let this mess up the treaty. If we do, it's going to be even worse than before." Kale nodded, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not going to let them ruin this, not after everything we've been through." Ryan smiled. "You know, I think you're the only person who can keep me calm in situations like this." Kale met his gaze, the faintest trace of warmth in her eyes. "And you're the only one who can make me laugh when I don't want to." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a communicator beep. It was the Terran military, urgently requesting their presence at the station's command center. "We need to go," Ryan said, already moving toward the exit. "Stay close." In the command center, the gravity of the situation hit them both. The mercenaries had been hired by a faction of radical Xyrathi who opposed the peace talks. They had made a move to sabotage everything Ryan and Kale had worked for. "This is a disaster," Ryan said, clenching his fists. "We were so close." "I know," Kale replied, her voice steely. "But we're not giving up, not yet." "We don't have much time," Ryan said, packing. "If we don't act fast, everything could fall apart." Kale turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Then we act together." Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had risked everything for peace, the woman who had made him feel something he never expected to feel again. "I'm with you, Kale, always." Her expression softened, but only for a moment. "Then let's finish what we started." The next few days were filled with tension and late-night strategies. Ryan and Kale worked together, side by side, using every tool at their disposal to get the peace treaty back on track. But the weight of their emotions still lingered, unspoken and heavy between them. One evening, as the stars outside the station blinked into view, Kale stood by the viewport, staring out into the vast emptiness. Ryan came up beside her, his step slow. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice soft. She turned to face him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Is that so?" "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "But you're not alone anymore, Kale. You don't have to do this by yourself." Kale's smile widened, and for the first time in days, the weight on her shoulders seemed to lift just a little. "I know." Ryan reached out, brushing her hand gently with his. "We've got this, together." The atmosphere in the station's command center was tense. Ryan and Kale stood side by side, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy, where red alerts flashed across the screen. Mercenaries still roamed parts of Astra Station, and the rogue Xyrathi faction was growing more aggressive by the hour. "We don't have much time," Kale said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed the worry that lingered beneath. "The radicals are closing in on the treaty signing." "I know," Ryan said, his brow furrowing as he studied the map. "We have to act fast. If we don't get this under control, the treaty as good as gone." A voice crackled over their comms, followed by a sharp voice. "Commander Hale, Ambassador Kaylani, we've located another group of mercenaries in Sector 4. They're attempting to sabotage the diplomatic fleet. Ryan clenched his jaw. Damn it, they won't stop until they've ruined everything. Kale's eyes flashed with determination. Then we make sure they don't succeed. Ryan looked at her, feeling a surge of pride. She had always been a leader, unshaken in the face of danger. But today he saw something new in her, something softer, more vulnerable. The events of the past few days had tested them both, but here they were, standing together, united in purpose. "We'll deal with them," Ryan said, his voice firm. "But we need to be quick. You lead the negotiations, I'll take care of the mercenaries." Kale didn't hesitate. She gave him a brief nod and they both turned to their respective duties. Ryan could feel the weight of their words, unspoken promises, hanging in the air between them. This wasn't just about the treaty anymore. This was personal. Ryan made his way through the winding corridors of Astra Station, his hand resting on the blaster at his side. The station was eerily quiet now, the usual hum of voices replaced by the occasional shout or the sound of boots hitting metal floors. He passed a few Zyrathi soldiers who gave him wary glances, but he barely noticed them. His focus was sharp, zeroed in on the task ahead. As he approached Sector 4, he heard the unmistakable sound of blaster fire. His heart raced. They were close. Ryan ducked into a side corridor and activated his comm. "Kale, they're right outside. Get to the command center and lock it down. I'll take care of this." "We're almost there," she responded, her voice cool but with an edge of urgency. "Just make sure you don't get yourself killed." Ryan smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. With a deep breath, he rounded the corner, and the sight of 3 mercenaries in black armor greeted him. They hadn't noticed him yet. "Hey," Ryan shouted, aiming his blaster at the nearest one. "You're not welcome here." The mercenaries whipped around, weapons raised, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. Then, without warning, the station erupted in chaos. Blaster fire lit up the hallway, sparks flying as Ryan dove behind cover, returning fire. His heart was pounding, but his focus was razor-sharp. These mercenaries might have thought they could disrupt the peace talks, but Ryan wasn't about to let that happen. Not after everything they'd been through. Back at the command center, Kale's fingers flew over the control panel, navigating through layers of encrypted communication channels. The radicals were already trying to broadcast misinformation to the other factions, hoping to turn the peacekeepers against each other. "No," she muttered, her eyes narrowing as she worked. "I won't let them ruin this." She hacked into the central communication system, silencing the radicals, broadcast and sending out an official message instead. "The peace talks will continue. No one will stop us." Her heart raced as she listened to the distant sounds of battle, but she couldn't afford to let fear take over. Ryan needed her to be strong. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. Ryan's hand tightened around the grip of his blaster as the final mercenary fell, crumpling to the ground in a heap. The hallway was littered with debris, but the danger had passed. He exhaled, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. The adrenaline of the fight began to ebb, leaving only the cold sweat on his brow and the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "Ryan, are you there?" Kale's voice crackled through his comm. "I'm here," he replied, taking a moment to steady himself. "Sector 4 is cleared. The mercenaries are down." "Good," Kale said, her tone a mix of relief and authority. "We're secure here, too. The treaty is back on track." Ryan smiled, though his muscles still felt tense. "You're something else, you know that." "I've been told," she replied with a chuckle. "We both have our roles to play." "Yeah," he said, glancing down at the remains of the mercenaries. "And we both do it well." The following hours were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and barely contained chaos. Ryan and Kale worked together seamlessly, the bond between them growing stronger as they faced the final push to secure the treaty. By the time the peace agreement was signed, the tension in the room had dissipated. replaced with a quiet sense of triumph. The rebels had been defeated, the factions had agreed to a ceasefire, and the treaty was now in place. But it wasn't just the treaty that had been secured. Ryan and Kale stood side by side, watching as the leaders of both sides exchanged handshakes, their faces lighting up with relief. "We did it," Kale whispered, her eyes meeting his. "Against all odds." Ryan turned to her, his heart still racing from the events of the day. "We didn't just do it," he said, his voice low. "We did it together." She smiled softly, her gaze flickering down to their hands, inches apart. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for him, her fingers brushing against his. For a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to stop, leaving only the two of them, caught in the quiet space between what had been and what could be. Ryan's heart thudded in his chest as he leaned in, his voice a whisper against the chaos of the room. "When, Kale?" Her eyes met his, and she smiled, the same smile that had made him fall for her all those months ago. "When, Ryan," she echoed, "when it's right." The stars outside Astra Station flickered like tiny diamonds scattered across the void. The peace treaty had been signed. The mercenaries were neutralized. The factions had agreed to a ceasefire, their leaders standing together for the first time in centuries. But amidst all the triumph, there was something else, something quieter, more personal. Ryan stood at the observation deck, his hands resting on the railing as he looked out at the black expanse. His mind was still buzzing with the chaos of the past few days. The treaty, the mercenaries, the fight for peace. It had all felt so much bigger than him, than anything he had ever experienced. But there was one thing that stood out above everything else: Kale. She had been there every step of the way, her steady presence anchoring him when everything seemed to fall apart. She had been the voice of calm in the chaos, the rock he leaned on when the stakes were high. But there was something more now, something between them that neither could ignore. He couldn't stop thinking about her, her smile, her courage, the way she made him laugh even in the darkest moments. And as much as he tried to focus on the mission, it always came back to her. The soft hum of footsteps behind him broke his thoughts. He turned to see Kale walking toward him, her silver hair glowing under the station lights, her violet eyes reflecting the same exhaustion and relief that he felt. "Ryan," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of the day's events. "We did it." "We did," he said, offering a small smile. "Feels surreal, doesn't it?" She nodded, stepping beside him at the railing. For a moment, they both stared out at the stars in silence. The station had settled into an uneasy peace, and the immediate danger had passed. But there was something else hanging in the air between them, something that neither could avoid. Kale sighed softly, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and something deeper. "I didn't think it would be like this." "Like what?" Ryan asked, glancing at her. "This," she gestured at the view, but her words seemed to carry a different weight. "The treaty, the victory, all of it." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think we could pull it off?" She smiled faintly. "No, I knew we would, but I didn't realize how much it would change me, how much you would change me." Ryan felt a flutter in his chest. He knew exactly what she meant. Every moment they had spent together, every laugh, every argument had built something between them. And now, standing here on this station, he realized how deep that connection ran. "I'm glad it changed you," he said softly, "because it's changed me too, more than I ever expected." Kale turned to face him fully, her violet eyes searching his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "Ryan, I—" But before she could finish, the intercom crackled to life, cutting her off. "Commander Hale, Ambassador Kaylani, the Joint Security Task Force requests your presence in the main hall. Immediate attention required." Ryan sighed, frustration flashing across his face. "Of course, just when things are getting interesting." Kale chuckled softly. "Duty calls." They shared a brief, knowing look before turning and heading toward the main hall. Despite the interruption, the weight of their unspoken words hung in the air, unresolved. But Ryan knew there would be time for that later. They still had work to do. When they arrived in the main hall, they were greeted by the Terran and Xyrathi commanders, both wearing serious expressions. It was clear that the threat wasn't entirely over. The treaty had been signed, but the peace was fragile. Commander Hale, Ambassador Kailani, the Terran commander, greeted them. "We've had some reports from the outer sectors. A few radical elements from both sides are refusing to honor the ceasefire. We need you to negotiate a second agreement this time for their disarmament." Ryan felt his shoulders tense. "I thought we dealt with the extremists. Why are they still resisting?" "Some will never accept peace," the Xyrathi commander said, his voice cold. "We've done all we can, but it's up to you two now to ensure they comply." Ryan glanced at Kale. They both knew what that meant. They were being asked to hold the peace together, to be the last line of defense against the forces that still wanted to see this all fall apart. Kale met his gaze, and for a moment everything seemed to fade away. The mission, the danger, the responsibilities, none of it mattered. It was just the two of them, standing together against whatever came next. "We'll handle it," Ryan said, his voice steady. "We've come this far, we won't let it slip now." Kale nodded, her expression resolute. Together. The following days were filled with tense negotiations, each more difficult than the last. They met with representatives from both sides, navigating the fragile lines between diplomacy and intimidation. There were close calls, arguments, and threats, but Ryan and Kale held fast. They didn't back down. Through it all, their bond deepened. They learned how to read each other's thoughts with just a glance, how to predict the other's next move before it happened. They were a team, a true partnership. And during those quiet moments when the world didn't demand anything from them, they talked. About their hopes, their fears, their dreams. About what they wanted from this life, from each other. One evening, after another grueling round of talks, Kale found herself in the quiet observation room again. She was staring at the stars when Ryan walked in, his footsteps soft on the floor. "Still thinking about the treaty?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "No," she said, glancing at him. "I'm thinking about us." Ryan felt his chest tighten, but he said nothing. He walked toward her, stopping just behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt charged, like something important was about to happen. Kale finally turned to face him, her violet eyes shining with unspoken words. "Ryan, I've been thinking about what you said when you joked about marrying me." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "Kale." She reached up, her hand gently touching his cheek. "I think you might have been right, not about the joke, but about what we could be." Ryan's breath caught. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was real. And as the stars outside the station twinkled in the distance, Ryan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning. The stars outside Astra Station shone brighter than ever, the faint hum of the station's engines vibrating through the quiet corridors. The treaty was solidified. The peace had been secured. But in the quiet spaces between the victories, Ryan and Kale still had a battle to face, one that had nothing to do with war or politics. It was a battle of hearts. Ryan leaned against the observation window, staring out into the black void. The soft light from the station's distant stars reflected in his eyes. He had fought countless battles, won wars, and earned medals, but none of that mattered now. In that moment, it was just him and the woman who had turned his world upside down. His mind replayed the events of the past few days, the tension, the danger, the unexpected peace. But through it all there was one constant: Kale. He didn't know exactly when it had happened, when the line between professional respect and personal affection had blurred. But what he did know was that he was no longer the same man who had arrived on Astra Station all those months ago. He had changed, and Kale had changed him. The door to the observation room slid open, and Kale stepped inside. She looked tired, her posture still poised but with an edge of exhaustion that spoke volumes. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the unspoken words between them. "We did it. It's done. The treaty in place. The peace talks." "I know," he interrupted gently, pushing himself off the window and stepping toward her. "But that's not what's on my mind." Kale stopped mid-sentence, her violet eyes locking with his. "Then what is?" Ryan hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer. "You." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "Me." "Kale," Ryan began, his voice steady, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We've faced impossible odds, we've nearly died together, and through it all I could think about was you. And now the mission over. The treaty's signed. But there's still something I need to say." Kale's heart raced as she took a small step forward, not breaking eye contact. "Ryan, what are you saying?" He reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he held it gently in his. "I'm saying that this isn't just a mission. This isn't just about treaties or negotiations. It's about us. I've never met anyone like you. You've made me believe in something I didn't think was possible." She blinked, her heart thundering in her chest. "You're not just saying this because we're both tired, are you?" "No," he said, his voice full of certainty. "This isn't a momentary thing, Kale. This is real. What I feel for you is real." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Kale's mind raced as she processed his words. She had spent so long hiding behind the walls of diplomacy and duty that she had never allowed herself to feel anything that wasn't expected of her. But standing here, with Ryan's hand in hers and his gaze unwavering, she knew this was different. Kale began, but her words were cut off when Ryan gently cupped her cheek, bringing her face to his. "Kale," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "What are we doing here if we can't face this? We're in this together. I want more than just another mission. I want a future, a real one with you." Tears pricked at the corners of Kale's eyes, and she swallowed hard. "But Ryan, what if it's too hard? What if we're too different?" Ryan's thumb brushed across her cheek in a tender motion. "I don't care about the differences. I care about us. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and if anyone can handle the challenges ahead, it's you." "And you," Kale asked softly, "what about you?" "I'm not perfect," Ryan said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "but I'm willing to fight for this, for you." Kale looked up at him, and in that moment, she saw all the sincerity she had never thought she'd find in another person, a human of all things. Her heart swelled, and before she could stop herself, she closed the gap between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, as if they were both testing the waters of something neither of them had fully allowed themselves to believe in. But as they pulled each other closer, the kiss deepened, turning from a quiet confession into something louder, more passionate. When they finally pulled away, they were both breathless, faces flushed with the intensity of what had just happened. "Are you sure about this?" Kale asked, her voice a little shaky, but filled with a vulnerability she hadn't let herself show in years. Ryan chuckled, brushing a lock of silver hair behind her ear. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Kale smiled, the weight of her uncertainty slowly lifting. She had spent so long keeping her heart locked away, afraid of the consequences of letting anyone in. But standing here with Ryan, she knew it was worth the risk. She had found something she didn't even know she was looking for. "I never thought I'd end up here," Kale whispered, her hands resting on his chest. "Neither did I," Ryan said with a grin, "but here we are." For a moment they simply stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the universe swirling around them. They had done the impossible, brokered a peace between two warring species, saved countless lives, and yet this moment felt even more significant than all the negotiations combined. "So what now?" Kale asked, leaning her forehead against his. Ryan's smile softened as he looked into her eyes. "Now we live together." Kale's heart swelled at his words. There were no guarantees in this galaxy, no promises of a perfect future. But in this moment, standing on Astra Station with Ryan, she realized that sometimes the greatest adventure was the one you took with someone who made you believe in the impossible. Together, she repeated, her voice filled with warmth. And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the stars beyond the station, they both knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.